My uncle didn't have much education and worked hard his whole life without earning much. He had to save diligently to send his 2 children to university. Despite the difficulties, both of his children became successful, landing good jobs in the big city and living stable lives. My cousin advised my uncle several times to stop working. It was time to rest and enjoy his later years. He was even planning to bring my uncle and aunt to the city next month. But my uncle was the kind of person who got restless if he wasn't busy. He refused, saying he'd probably die of boredom in the city. The last time he stayed for a month, he nearly fell ill. Even in his 50s, my uncle was very strong. He could carry a bag of cement up and down stairs without even panting. Everyone, including my aunt, didn't want to stop him, only advising him to quit the heavy labor and find something lighter. Suddenly, a few days ago, my mother called to say my uncle was gravely ill. This shocked me. I quickly asked, "How can he be sick? He's always been so healthy." The next day, I bought some nutritional supplements and fruit and went to visit him, still feeling that something was very strange. The moment I saw him, I gasped in disbelief. I blurted out, "Uncle, why are you so thin?" My uncle, who had always been a large, robust man, was now lying in bed, his frame having shrunk considerably. His eyes were sunken and lifeless, his face ashen like old tree bark. It was clearly a serious illness. Seeing me, he whispered weakly, "You came to visit?" When my aunt saw me, her eyes welled up with tears. She said they couldn't find the cause of his illness and that, "Your uncle has definitely run into something unclean. The doctors can't find anything wrong with him." Hearing this, my uncle shot my aunt a look, then struggled to sit up. "Come, nephew," he said, "sit here and talk with me." My uncle told me he was working at a paper tube factory. His main job was escorting goods. Escorting goods meant riding with the factory's driver to make deliveries, then being responsible for unloading the cargo at the destination. The driver's name was Zhang Lam, but everyone called him Old Zhang. He and my uncle were around the same age and got along well, which made the long trips less boring. About a month ago, the factory received an order, but it was a long way off, a half-day's drive. The dispatcher said the customer needed it urgently and requested they set off early. Old Zhang, worried about daytime traffic, suggested to my uncle that they make the delivery at night. My uncle thought it was reasonable and agreed. This wasn't their first night delivery. In fact, they preferred driving at night because there were fewer cars and the roads were better. The two friends chatted and laughed as they drove. When they started talking about their children, they became even more animated, talking non-stop. The long drive was less dull. After getting off the highway, Old Zhang checked the fuel gauge and saw the tank was almost empty. He was a bit worried. He had forgotten to refuel before they loaded the cargo. Luckily, just as they were wondering what to do, they saw a gas station by the side of the road. Old Zhang quickly pulled in. In the middle of the night, the roads were deserted and the gas station was empty, lit only by a few flickering, dim yellow lights. Old Zhang parked the truck and looked around, but he couldn't see any attendants. Strange, he wondered. Why is there nobody here? He then shouted, "Hello?" a few more times, but there was still no response. After a moment, with still no sign of an attendant, my uncle clapped Old Zhang on the shoulder and said, "Stop shouting. I'll get out and look." Old Zhang figured that with so few cars at night, The attendant was probably napping in the break room inside the convenience store and told my uncle to check in there. My uncle deftly hopped out of the truck and walked towards the convenience store. This gas station had 3 rows of pumps. As my uncle walked past the 3rd row, he suddenly saw someone. Judging by the uniform, it was clearly a station attendant. She must have been hidden by the pump before, which was why they hadn't seen her. My uncle was about to walk over and say something, but he stopped in his tracks, feeling that something was very wrong. The woman was muttering something, but there was absolutely nothing in front of her. Even stranger, the fuel nozzle in her hand was gushing gasoline, which wasn't normal. The gas was pouring onto the ground, soaking a large patch. It was clear she hadn't just started, but had been doing this for some time. Who is she talking to? My uncle thought. Could there be a car I can't see? The thought made him involuntarily take a step back. Just then, the attendant seemed to notice my uncle. She looked over at him. Then she waved at him, signaling for him to wait a moment, that she would be over to help him after she was finished. By this point, my uncle was scared enough to pee his pants. He gave an awkward nod and hurried back to the truck. Back in the cab, old Jung saw his pale face and asked, "What's wrong? Did you find the attendant?" My uncle stammered out what he had just seen, saying, "I found her, but I don't know who she's pumping gas for." Old Jung's expression changed instantly. Having driven for many years, he'd seen his share of strange things. His experience told him that in a situation like this, running was the best policy. His voice urgent, Old Jang told my uncle, "We can't stay here. We have to go, now," and prepared to start the engine. But when my uncle saw Old Jang was about to leave, he objected. He didn't want to just abandon the attendant. My uncle was a warm-hearted man by nature, and leaving without a word just wasn't his style. Even if we're going, we should at least tell her. With that, my uncle opened the truck door, jumped out, and called back, "Wait for me, I'll be right back." Old Jang's face darkened. He cursed my uncle for being a busybody, but didn't feel right driving off alone. He could only wait in the truck, ready to floor it at the first sign of trouble. Just then, the female attendant came running over to meet my uncle. She quickly greeted him and apologized, explaining that she had been talking to another driver and hadn't noticed their truck pull in. Hearing this, my uncle quickly pulled her aside. "You just ran into a ghost," he said urgently. He pushed her toward the truck. "There's no time to waste," he urged. "You need to leave with us right now before something else happens." The attendant saw the serious look on his face, realized he wasn't joking, and also grew tense. What ghost?" she stammered. Then she remembered the car she had just served. Suddenly, the attendant began to rummage through her pockets, looking for something. She had just taken cash from that car. She had to check it. With that, she pulled a banknote from her pocket, saying, "This is the cash he just gave me." But in an instant, both of them froze. The banknote, which had looked normal, had transformed into just paper hell money. Only then did the girl realize the gravity of the situation. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and her eyes darted around in confusion. She stammered, starting to believe what my uncle had said. Then, she turned to my uncle, her eyes pleading, and asked him to go with her to check the security cameras. If this really happened, she had to explain it to her boss. My uncle, Being soft-hearted and still not entirely convinced, also wanted to verify it for himself. Checking the camera was the most direct way. He agreed, telling her to lead the way to the camera room. The two of them immediately headed for the gas station's monitoring room. The path was dark, lit only by a few dim, flickering lights. As they were walking down the hallway, my uncle suddenly stopped, having realized something. His face turned pale, and large beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. Because as they had just passed under a light, the woman cast no shadow. And her feet were floating above the ground, her form blurry and indistinct. At that moment, the woman, noticing he had stopped, also stopped, but she did not turn around. Her voice became strange, dropping several octaves. "Why did you stop?" she asked. "The monitoring room is right up ahead." In that split second, my uncle snapped to his senses and screamed, "You damned ghost!" With that, he turned and ran for his life. A blood-curdling shriek echoed from behind him. "Don't go! Stay here with me!" My uncle glanced back as he ran. The woman's face had completely deformed. It was a twisted, rotting mass of flesh, as if it had been destroyed. My uncle didn't dare look again. He sped up, putting distance between himself and the woman, and quickly escaped the convenience store. He ran straight to the truck, yelling for old Zhang to drive, to get them out of there. Old Zhang didn't ask questions. He'd been wanting to leave for a while. He immediately turned the key, started the engine, and told my uncle to hold on. Old Zhang stomped on the gas, and the truck sped away from the gas station. Only after they had been driving for some time did my uncle finally catch his breath. He told old Zhang what had just happened, which made old Zhang break out in a cold sweat. This ghost had used a trick within a trick. It was unbelievable. My uncle's face was grim as he replayed the events. "You know," he said, "I think that ghost, she might not even know she's dead." After that, they both fell silent. They didn't say another word for the rest of the drive, both clearly shaken by the night's events. 3 days later, old Zhang and my uncle went out for another delivery, but this time during the day. A local they passed by mentioned that, half a month ago, this very gas station had caught fire and exploded while refueling a car. A female attendant and the driver in the car had both been burned to death on the spot. After that, my uncle suddenly fell ill and became bedridden. As I left my uncle's house, I specifically told my aunt to find a shaman to take a look at him. My aunt seemed helpless. She said my uncle was just too stubborn. "He won't let me find anyone," she said, "which is why it's dragged on this long." This morning at the branch office was very busy. There were many large and small cases, but they were mostly resolved. Suddenly someone ran in a hurry as screams echoed throughout the hallway. His expression was so frightened and panicked. He rushed to a policeman and started telling everything, but he was so scared he couldn't say anything clearly. He kept repeating that they were zombies, they were corpses, they could kill people. The policeman led the man to meet the boss Lu Feng. The policeman rushed inside to report everything to boss Lu Feng. However, the witness was so frightened that he couldn't tell all of it. But based on what his ramblings were, the suburb seemed to be having some kind of mysterious problem. Without hesitation, boss Lu Feng immediately ordered the first platoon to get ready with vehicles and weapons to reach the reported destination quickly. Following the instructions of the witness, the team soon arrived at a large cemetery outside the suburbs. The team needed to walk inside, led by boss Lu Feng, the man who was still panicked but calm enough to lead everyone to the location of the incident. The cemetery was huge, so the team had to walk for a while to reach the place where the stories reported about a zombie happened, but in front of them instead was a dead human body. Boss Lu Feng quickly ordered the forensic team and the investigation team to examine the body. As soon as the forensic team approached the body, both the team and the boss Lu Feng were amazed. In the end, what could happen to a victim that could cause such a horrible death? The first step of judgment, the victim was a middle-aged man who was probably the one visiting the grave, and the cause of death seemed like he was scared to death without closing his eyes, with a face frozen with fear. After checking the surroundings for a while, the team also found a fairly new discovery, so they rushed to report to boss Lu Feng. There was a very suspicious fallen tomb. The policeman reported to boss Lu. Boss Lu Feng ordered a thorough examination of the entire cemetery and around the other graves, where they should not leave any small details uninvestigated because this case consisted of many strange and suspicious things. Arriving at the headquarters, waiting for the witness to be calmer, the policeman asked again for more details about what he had seen. The witness was very stressed and confirmed that this case was not caused by humans but rather certainly related to what he saw. The policemen were also amazed and still thought that he was still very frightened because they were sure to find something if this was the case. The policeman then reassured him and asked him to explain everything in detail one more time. Last night, he went to the cemetery as always to worship his ancestors and burn gold and silver banknotes for his wife. It was around 11 p.m. While burning incense and saddened by his wife's death, he suddenly heard a murmur like someone was talking. He was curious because there was no one when he entered here a while ago, but he heard so many voices at that time. He turned back to take a closer look, and the thing in front of him shocked him. The screams were heard throughout the graveyard, but it was too late that no one could listen to his calls for help. In front of him was a zombie. Just like in the zombie movies, its teeth and fingernails were so long and gruesome, they slowly started coming towards him. He was so frightened that he urinated in his pants while trying his best to run away, but as he turned, he bumped someone's leg. Before he could muster himself up, he looked up hoping that someone would come to save him, but what he had bumped into further frightened him. In front of him now was another zombie with the looks of a woman. He used up his courage to pick up a log from the ground to defend himself, but he was surrounded by zombies. They multiplied and surrounded him. In a panic, he repeatedly swung the log to protect himself and found his way out. The claws of the zombies were highly sharp, injuring his face, but after a while of struggling, he escaped and immediately went to the police station to report the incident. He firmly asserted that he was not lying with panic on his face, even though it seemed unbelievable. The police officer who took the testimony quickly showed it to boss Lu Feng and said that the witness did not seem to be making the story up. Boss Lu Feng pondered for a bit and then ordered to find the cemetery guard to investigate more clues. Then they rushed to their destination, where the cemetery guard always lived in a small house next to the cemetery. The guard was a middle-aged man with a sad face. After briefly listening to the police about the case, the man said that lately he has often heard many strange noises coming from the cemetery. The policeman carefully took note of the old man's testimony. As he spoke, the older man looked towards the cemetery. He said that he had seen strange things, many zombies wandering around the cemetery, but he just thought that he was all dizzy and hearing imaginary things. Then he took the policeman to look around the cemetery again. Then suddenly there was something very strange that caught the attention of the policeman. A tomb had been broken yesterday morning, but today it was set up neatly. But according to the cemetery guard, this tomb has not been cared for in a long time. After taking the information in for a while and looking around, the detective returned to report to boss Lu Feng about the situation.
After hearing about everything, Lu Feng was very angry, thinking that someone was pretending to be evil to harm others. So he made orders that night to silently enter the cemetery to investigate. That night at the cemetery, the atmosphere was terrifyingly quiet. Captain Chow and his teammates soon led an ambush throughout the cemetery, and eventually a suspicious person appeared. Captain Chow silently watched the suspicious man because he did not look like visiting the grave. Just a moment later, he turned in another direction. Captain Chow hurriedly chased after him. He could not see anything except for a grave in front of his eyes. Right now, he suddenly heard horrible voices and howls. He glanced back to see what was going on. Behind him was a large group of zombies. They were pale and had long claws slashing out while slowly approaching him. On reflex, Captain Chow took out his gun and shot at an oncoming zombie. By this time, his teammates came to assist him right on time, and everyone also found out that shooting at them didn't really work. Captain Chow was unconvinced if they were real zombies because there's no such nonsense that exists in the world. After a long struggle, they still showed no sign of stopping but only continued to attack, getting closer and closer. Immediately, Captain Chow ordered to capture all of them. He did not believe that in this world there were things such as zombies. After capturing and cuffing them, Captain Chow discovered something behind the other tomb. There seemed to be some kind of strange movement coming from there. He had immediately rushed to get behind the tombstone, only to discover the man he watched earlier intending to escape. As soon as he popped his head, Captain Chow pointed his gun at his head. It turned out that below this grave was a cellar, and so the suspicious man had been captured. After arresting the man, Captain Chow went down to the cellar to inspect. Underneath the basement, he found cages and signal transceivers. At the police station, interrogating the strange man, he said he was the old guard of the cemetery because without education, he had no home. So the cemetery guard had a house to stay in, and the salary was relatively high. He was delighted with it, but because he was lazy, he was kicked out. At some point, he discovered that these homeless people had strange diseases and moved like zombies, and most had even lost their awareness. He confined in them under the fake tomb that he created and then told them to scare anyone who would get near the cemetery. But unexpectedly, all of this caused death. The homeless people were taken into the headquarters private emergency room by the boss Lu Feng. Boss Lu asked the doctor about the conditions of these homeless people. Through initial diagnosis, the doctor said that they had strange diseases, causing their brains to be eroded. This disease is contagious and makes people move like zombies. Then Boss Lu told the doctor that these people should stay here for research. They could not be released, otherwise they would be a problematic pandemic. That afternoon at the police station, the subordinates also brought the man who had the plan to Boss Lu Feng. He pondered for a long time and decided to deal with the other man for his crimes. Finally, the case was closed. Boss Lu told his subordinates to notify the press that there were no zombies or corpses. The case was also marked as a top secret case and listed in the issues that need to be monitored by the police department.
This horror story takes place in a merchant's household. The father was often away on business, leaving only his wife and son at home. Because the wife was timid, she let her son sleep in the same bed with her. One night, the son heard his mother moaning as if she were having a nightmare. He sat up to check and saw a shadowy figure crouched over his mother. He immediately sat up and shouted to ask who it was. The creature quickly fled toward the door, but his mother remained fast asleep, unaware of anything. Grabbing a wooden staff for self-defense, he rushed after the figure. However, when he reached the door, he saw that the latch was still intact. He couldn't understand how the creature had escaped through it. The following night, he discovered that his mother was missing from the room. Sensing something was wrong, he grabbed a hatchet and went looking for her. He approached a small adjoining room and heard his mother's urgent cries from inside. He quickly unlatched the door, shouting for his mother as he entered. Inside, the room was pitch dark, making it impossible for him to see anything. He gripped his hatchet tightly, preparing to defend himself. Suddenly, a dark shadow lunged at him. Without hesitation, he swung his hatchet wildly at it. The shadowy figure fled at incredible speed, but he felt that he had struck some part of it. When he looked again, his mother was lying on the floor, her clothes disheveled. Panicking, he called out to her and carried her back to their room. From that day on, young Master Lee's mother became dazed and incoherent, laughing and crying unpredictably. The doctors who examined her found no physical illness, diagnosing her condition as a mental affliction. She even tried to strip off her clothes in front of everyone, shocking those around her. Her son suspected that the creature he had injured the previous night was still causing trouble. Searching around the courtyard, he finally discovered a severed foxtail lying on the ground. Following a trail of blood, he tracked it to an abandoned house, several households away, where the bloodstains abruptly disappeared inside. He climbed the wall to peek in. The place was unoccupied, the garden overgrown with weeds, clearly abandoned for a long time. He decided to hide in a corner and wait. As night fell, 3 figures appeared in the courtyard, 2 masters and a servant. One of them was rubbing his backside, cursing the young man for being too fierce, having cut off his tail and forcing him to recuperate for a few days. He then asked his companion about his relationship with some unknown young lady. The other man smugly replied that the young lady's family had once hired a Taoist priest to exorcise him, but he had driven them all away. From their conversation, it was clear that both had been bewitching innocent women. The wounded one was the fox spirit who had harassed the young man's mother. The 2 drank wine late into the night before finally leaving only the servant behind, dragging a foxtail behind him. The next morning, when the servant left the house, the young man quietly followed him. It turned out that the servant was going to buy wine. At the wine shop, the young man struck up a conversation with him, pretending to be a fellow fox spirit and an old acquaintance. The servant, suspecting nothing, chatted with him like an old friend. The young man casually inquired about the wounded fox spirit's condition. The servant revealed that he was still recovering. The young man shared some food with the servant, deliberately revealing the severed foxtail to earn his trust. Pretending to be a real fox spirit, he lamented how they had to hide their tails to avoid detection. While the servant was engrossed in conversation, the young man discreetly slipped rat poison into the wine jug. As dusk approached, the servant bid him farewell and returned to the abandoned house, unknowingly carrying the poisoned wine. The young man waited until the servant had entered the house and locked the door before leaving with confidence. The next morning, when he returned to the house, he found the bodies of 2 dead fox spirits, but the servant had disappeared. He muttered under his breath Let's see if you dare to harm people again. One of the fox spirits had only half a tail left. It was the very creature that had bewitched his mother. He buried both fox spirits on the spot. When he returned home, he found his mother had regained her senses, but had no memory of what had happened. Seeing her son return, she happily greeted him. Overjoyed that his mother had recovered, he embraced her. The tale of the clever and courageous young man who rid the town of the fox spirits was celebrated by everyone for generations to come. Let me introduce myself. I am a delivery person. Every day, my work begins with a constant ringing of new orders on my phone. Like all my colleagues, my job is to be on standby in front of restaurants, waiting and competing for every order, hoping to earn more income. Every day, in order to make a living, I have to risk my life with speed, constantly weaving through crowded traffic to deliver goods on time. Regarding my job, everyone probably knows the routine. Everything happens in a hurry. There's not a single moment to rest. After accepting an order, I have to get to the restaurant as fast as possible to pick up the food. Every second is precious. There's no time to waste. After that, I have to continue racing against time. I have to deliver the food to the customer as quickly as possible, regardless of the dangers on the road. To avoid being late, my only option is to weave through the smallest gaps in traffic, an extremely risky and dangerous action. According to statistics, on average, 2.5 delivery people are involved in traffic accidents every day. It's safe to say this is one of the most dangerous professions. We also have to deal with all kinds of customers. If we are even a few minutes late, we might get a complaint or be severely scolded. My monthly income is unstable, depending on my health and the weather. I have to work until late every night before I can return home. When I get off work and come home, my body is exhausted. I barely have the strength to drag myself up the stairs of the rental building. I live in a single rental room that costs only 900 yuan a month. 3 people rent the apartment, but we almost never see or talk to each other. The irony is that every day I deliver dozens of delicious meals to other people, but I am always the one who eats late, alone in my empty room. That's life. No matter how tired I am after dinner, I still have to smoke a cigarette. Because there is a smoke detector in the room, I can only go to the balcony. To be honest, I really enjoy smoking on the balcony. It helps me relieve stress after a long day, and it's also when I feel lucky to have returned home safely. Maybe someone will ask, why do you work such a hard and dangerous job? The answer is simple. This job has no high requirements. As long as you have the strength, you can earn money. Every time I look at the city at night, I also have dreams and plans for the future. I hope that one day my life will get better. I've talked a bit too much, but that was to set the stage for the story to come. Everything started one day after I got off work and came home. That day, I washed my uniform. I figured that no matter what, it would be dry by tomorrow morning. There was nothing to worry about. However, it didn't dry. The humid weather left my uniform still damp, so I couldn't wear it to work, which was very annoying. Not wearing a uniform would result in a fine. Just when I didn't know what to do, I saw another company uniform hanging on the balcony. I didn't know who it belonged to. My 2 flatmates didn't work this job. I guessed that it belonged to a colleague who used to rent here and left it behind. I didn't think much of it and just put it on. The shirt was a little faded and stiff, but the size fit me quite well, so there was no big problem. That day, as I went down the stairs, I had a strange feeling. It felt like someone was following me right behind me, which was very scary. I unconsciously turned my head to look, but I didn't see anyone. At that time, I didn't think too much of it, just figuring I hadn't gotten enough rest. As usual, I went to the gathering point to wait for orders. A colleague saw me and asked why I was wearing such an old uniform. He was very curious. I just laughed it off, saying that my uniform hadn't dried, so I had to borrow someone else's. He just teased me for a bit and didn't ask any more questions. After a few sentences, a new order came in. I quickly got on my motorcycle and started a new day of work, completely unaware that disaster was about to strike. When I went to pick up the food, you should know that fast food restaurants usually have glass doors, and during business hours, those doors are always open. When you walk past the glass door, there will be a reflection. That's a very normal thing. There's nothing to worry about or pay attention to. However, when I walked past the glass door, I was startled to discover that in the reflection, someone was walking right behind me, a very frightening figure. Furthermore, that person's head and face were covered in blood. That horrifying sight sent chills down my spine, terrifying me to the extreme. I couldn't believe it. I screamed in fear and stepped back. However, there was no one behind me, and in the reflection, it was only me looking terrified. My scream was a bit loud, causing the customers in the restaurant to turn and look. Their strange looks made me feel a little embarrassed and awkward. The owner of the restaurant also asked me what was wrong. I didn't explain much. I quickly grabbed the food and left, just wanting to get out of there as fast as possible. When I got out the door, I unconsciously glanced at the glass door again. I wanted to confirm that there was no one behind me, that it was just a hallucination. That day, I was a bit rattled, or to be more accurate, I was a bit unlucky. Unfortunate things kept happening to me, and I couldn't avoid them. I was riding my motorcycle when a car in front of me suddenly braked hard. The unexpected situation left me no time to react. I could only try my best to avoid it. I was following a bit too closely. Fortunately, my brakes were still good, so there was no collision. A close call. A real stroke of luck. Because of my sudden stop, a car behind me almost hit me. The driver stuck his head out and cursed at me horribly. The driver drove for a while but still turned back to curse at me. This wasn't the first time this happened. Because of my job, I was already used to it. I didn't have much time, so I continued with my work. I drove for 2 more intersections. That day, the road seemed more crowded than usual. Because the system kept reminding me that I was about to be late, I decided to run a yellow light, a risky decision. Unexpectedly, on another road, there was also a small truck. That driver also intended to run the yellow light, a deadly coincidence. The result was that just as I was driving to the middle of the intersection, the truck came straight at me. Its speed was very fast, with no signs of slowing down. At that moment, I no longer had time to react. I could only stare blankly as the truck sped towards me, unable to avoid it. Death was very close. With a bang, I was hit and fell to the ground. The powerful impact dazed me, and I couldn't move. I could only lie there and endure it. The truck's speed was very fast. It ran over my motorcycle, dragging it along the road, creating a deafening and very frightening sound. and I was dragged under the truck. I was dragged along the road for a bit, my body in pain, unable to move. I could only wait for death. I stared blankly as the wheel came straight for my head. I wanted to dodge, but I couldn't move. I could only close my eyes and wait for death. I thought I would be crushed. As I was closing my eyes to await death, my body was suddenly pulled away by a strong force, an unexpected intervention. I felt as if someone had quickly pulled me out from under the truck. That person had saved me from an imminent death. Due to my condition at that time and the dim light, I couldn't see the person's face clearly, but thinking back on it now, it seemed to be the person who had been following me. After pulling me out from under the truck, that person vanished without a trace. He had saved me and then left without a word, a silent hero. After the collision, I felt a bit dizzy. I heard passers-by talking and slowly approaching me, my heart filled with panic. I wanted to see if the person who saved me was in the crowd. I wanted to know who he was and why he had come to my aid in my time of need. However, the answer was no. In the crowd, there was no sign of that person. It seemed he had truly disappeared without a trace. A few kind people helped me up. I tried to move my arms and legs. Nothing was missing, and I could still move. It was a miracle that I had survived. To be safe, I still went to the hospital for a checkup. Besides a few scratches, there was nothing to worry about in my body. It was a real miracle. When I got home, I suddenly realized something. Could the events that happened today be related to the shirt I was wearing? A suspicion arose. The more I thought about it, the more I felt there was a problem. Perhaps the owner of this shirt had died under a wheel, and when I wore it and was in danger, he had come back to save me. To know the truth, I had to ask my flatmates. I waited for a long time at the door, and finally, the person from the next room came out. He was probably going to the restroom. Normally, we didn't talk much. However, this time, I took the initiative to call him over, wanting to ask him a few things. I asked him about the uniform that was always hanging on the balcony. I wanted to know who it belonged to and why it had been left there for so long. My flatmate said that the uniform did indeed belong to a former colleague of mine who used to live here. His words confirmed my suspicion. I was curious and asked why that person didn't take the uniform with him when he moved out. A very simple question, but the answer made me shiver. My flatmate said that the colleague had died, a truth that sent shivers down my spine. How could a dead person take their belongings with them? He said it with a very calm expression, as if it had nothing to do with him. I quickly asked him about the cause of that person's death. I heard he had died suddenly by the side of the road while making a delivery. However, I didn't believe it, because accidents like this are not uncommon in our profession. As for why he saved me, maybe it was because he didn't want me to die young like he did. Or maybe it was just my hallucination. At present, I still have to continue competing for orders, racing against time. It's not that I don't want to live a good life, but that I have to live first. I still go to the balcony to smoke every night. The only difference is that I will light another cigarette and place it next to me, as if to pay my respects to that unfortunate colleague. I have also washed the uniform and hung it back on the balcony. My story ends here. It's not easy for us to live.
This story is a true one I witnessed and which haunts me to this very day. When I was in middle school, I attended a gifted boarding school in the district. It was also the first time I had to live away from home and be independent. The dorm room I stayed in had 4 students, including one named Ben. He was eccentric, just lounging around in his room all day. Even though I asked him out to play football, he refused time and time again. He seemed to have a hard time getting along with anyone. Over time, we also became afraid of him, but he was the one who wanted to isolate himself, not because we shunned him. What was stranger was that he just liked to sleep all day. At the end of class, he would turn back to his room, climb into bed and sleep, as if sleeping was his only passion. A month later, something scary started happening to us. That night, I was sleeping when I heard strange noises. It seemed that the sound of the door opening was waking me up. I became curious and thought it must be one of the friends in the room getting up to no good in the bathroom. However, that day I still smelt a burning smell from somewhere. I sat up immediately, grabbed the flashlight from under the pillow, and shone the light around. I also asked, "Who's there? If you're just going to the bathroom, don't be so noisy." I shined my flashlight at Ben's place, but he was nowhere to be found. I thought it was true that he just went out to go to the toilet. My voice woke the other 2. Everyone was sleeping and told me not to pay attention to what Ben was doing because he must have had a stomachache, and that was why he smelled like that. Then we didn't think much of Ben but lay down and continued to sleep. It was quite cold that night. Near morning I suddenly woke up because I felt the need to urinate and decided to go out to the bathroom. I looked over at Ben's bed and was amazed. Ben hadn't yet come back. The door was still open. Why was he out all night? I walked out slowly. I would go to see what was wrong with Ben. This guy had a lot of weird actions, but after all, he was still my roommate. I should take care of him too, of course. As I neared the door, I suddenly heard footsteps. At this point, Ben walked in. His face looked quite tired. I called to him. "Ben, do you have diarrhea or something? The crime of eating so much, hey? Your face looks so unsightly." This time, however, Ben did not say anything. His face was like a lost soul, not responding to my words as he kept walking. It felt very strange. Normally Ben would answer anything I asked, but that day his attitude was very strange. I did not know what was happening. As I looked at him, I realized he was walking very strange. Even when Ben climbed into bed, he did not take off his slippers. He was really eccentric. I thought of going over there to tell him to take off his sandals, but at the time, I wanted to pee, so I just ignored him. The following day, I decided to tell the story of Ben to 2 of my roommates and ask them all to see where Ben went. I assumed he was sleepwalking. As I expected that night, the door opened again. Ben walked out with a strange gait. The 3 of us were curiously watching from behind, wondering if this guy was doing something shady, or was he really sleepwalking as I guessed. There was indeed something shady. Ben didn't go to the bathroom but walked past it. He then walked up the stairs as we slowly followed. Ben continued to walk up to the 4th floor with a lost soul, then to the 5th floor. Again, our dorm room had 5 floors and we were on the 3rd floor. Because the number of students was not that much, the 4th and 5th floors were empty. We felt curious. What was Ben doing there? Above the 5th floor was empty space, darkness, where the air was cold and the musty smell was creepy. When we got there, Ben was nowhere to be found. We felt weird, knowing that he was there. How could he disappear so fast? But just then suddenly a girl's cry rang out at the end of the corridor, accompanied by a scary interrupting voice. We felt chills down our spines. This place was a male dormitory, so why was there a female up here? Maybe they were ghosts. Just thinking about it, all three of us got goosebumps. We gathered courage and walked to the room at the end of the hallway. We wanted to go to where the crying was coming from. I thought that maybe Ben was hiding some scary secret. In the dim darkness, two black figures appeared by the window. They were facing the window and with their backs to us. I recognized one person as Ben, but the long-haired girl beside him, we didn't know who she was. At this point, we understood and looked at each other and smiled. It turned out that Ben was secretly dating a girlfriend in this area. We didn't expect a shy guy like Ben to have a girlfriend. As if he heard our laughter, Ben suddenly turned his face. However, the strange thing was, where was the girl standing next to him? The three of us went inside the room. I cheerfully teased Ben that he had a girlfriend and refused to introduce her to us. He secretly met up here late at night. Is that what you were doing, Ben? However, when we shone the flashlight into the room, we did not see their girlfriend. But she was just there, right there. We curiously shone the light across the room to look for her, but there was absolutely no one there. What the hell was going on? I walked over and looked out the window. Strangely enough, this was the 5th floor area, empty of all people. Did we get dizzy just then? Ben was still standing motionless and neither spoke nor answered our questions. I pointed my flashlight at him. It was scary that Ben's face became very strange. He was crying, and his eyes were white. What was really strange was that the tears kept coming from his eyes, as it turned out that he was the one crying all the time. All three of us were startled when we saw Ben's scary expression. So all the noises were coming from Ben, and we didn't see any girls in the room. One of us thought that Ben was sleepwalking. He even asked if he should wake up. Before he could finish his sentence, he reached out and took Ben's shoulder. But the unexpected thing happened. Ben collapsed immediately, unconsciously. After seeing the scene in front of them, everyone was scared and quickly called for help. Then I heard from the manager again that Ben had a history of sleepwalking and had only recently gotten worse. The hospital later reported that Ben's life was not in danger, but his health was deteriorating. The strange thing was that the dormitory manager told us not to spread the scary story around. I also didn't know if Ben's sleepwalking was real. And who was that girl standing next to him? This was all still a mystery to me.
It occurred in 2015 at a vocational high school in Nagakawa, Japan. That year, I graduated from middle school but failed to enter high school, so I enrolled in this vocational technical school to learn how to repair machines. Our school had just built a new and very spacious facility, and the three of us lived together in a dormitory. The bond between the three of us was strong. On a weekend I played poker with a friend in the dorm, but if there were only 2 players it was a little sad, so we were going to invite the other guy, Yoshi, to join us. However, because Yoshi was not in the dorm, we didn't have much fun playing most of the time. Yoshi was in fact very different from the rest of us. He had been accepted to a prestigious high school that year, but he chose this one instead. We noticed him staring at his phone that day with a blank face, so we crept up behind him. We all assumed Yoshi was in love. secretly chatting or watching a 18+ movie at the time. But as we got closer, we noticed that he was staring at a photo on his phone and still had tears in his eyes. It was a picture of him with a short middle-aged man. It seemed to be his father. The two of them were standing beneath a stone wall and their smiles were especially warm in the photograph. We were surprised to see the situation, but we both assumed he was homesick. "Do you miss home?" the other friend inquired. I mocked him a few sentences, not with malice, just to make him feel better. "How old are you? Still crying?" But Yoshi still didn't say anything, and when he did, we were both taken aback. "Today is the first death anniversary of my father." We recognized that teasing Yoshi was a mistake. Fortunately, Yoshi was not the type of person who was difficult to get along with, nor did he blame us. Rather, he freely told us his story. We also learned more about his father from the story Yoshi was about to tell. Yoshi's hometown was located in the mountainous region of Gifu province. Despite living in a poor rural area, Yoshi's family life was very good because his father had a unique profession. In addition to farm work, his father went to the mountains to collect medical herbs, and the most difficult part was that he had to climb the sharp cliffs by tying a rope around his waist. Of course, this was extremely dangerous, and the mountains there were high and steep, and there were cliffs at the mountain's base. If you had fallen, you would certainly die. But taking these risks was worthwhile for Yoshi's father because the celandine, a valuable medicinal herb, grew on the rock ledge. The celandine was unknown to many people before, but in recent years, it had suddenly become extremely valuable because it could cure some rare diseases at the time, and its price was rising. And because Yoshi's father risked his life to climb the cliffs, every time he could pick the celandine, he would earn a large sum of money. As a result, the entire family's life was improved. He was very satisfied despite the fact that it was difficult and dangerous. However, he was very frugal, only using an old rope to climb up and down, which frequently worried Yoshi's mother because the old rope would be unstable. A year ago, the rope wrapped around the cliff and broke while he was taking medicines from the cliff. When the rope snapped, he lost the protection and fell off the cliff. Everything happened so quickly, he didn't have time to grasp anything. In fact, their family was very concerned about this herb-picking job. The family has warned him numerous times not to continue because it was extremely dangerous. But he always laughed and encouraged Yoshi to work hard at school. It would cost money to get into university later, so he wouldn't do it until Yoshi graduated. Yoshi's tears welled up again as he said this time, the first time we saw a child blaming himself for being so good at studying. I turned around and ran outside after hearing Yoshi's story and seeing how sad he was remembering his father. Many people considered that I was a smart boy. Everyone knew that I always did things on purpose but could never guess what I was going to do next. After 4 or 5 minutes, I ran in from the outside, lit 3 cigarettes stolen from the house next door. Yoshi's tears were flowing again at this point. He was very emotional. Honestly, I was not sure if this was appropriate, but it was a tribute to Yoshi's father. We lit 3 cigarettes and placed them on the windowsill, bowing 3 times simultaneously. After all of this, we were well-connected friends. We had a good time again. In this way, even after the cigarette had been extinguished, the father and son's emotions were always kept in their hearts. But when we went to bed that night, we experienced something very strange. We all slept soundly that night, but in the middle of the night, I awoke, feeling extremely cold for no apparent reason. I awoke but couldn't move. I could only open my eyes. At this point, I noticed a person standing in front of Yoshi's bed, a vague black shadow whose face couldn't be seen clearly, but I had a strong feeling that the person was his deceased father. The man sat on Yoshi's bed, smoking a cigarette and still talking to him in his mouth. His voice was so deep that I could only faintly hear it. He admitted it was his fault and advised Yoshi to take good care of himself, his mother, and to do well in school when he grew up. Yoshi was crying all the time, but he didn't wake up. Perhaps he was having a very sad dream. Yoshi's father remained bedside, talking to him. Then I fell asleep, and when I woke, it was already dawn. Yoshi's eyes were very red after waking up, and the dark circles under his eyes were also very visible, possibly due to his dream last night, in which he cried all night. I asked him if he had a nightmare the night before, because I saw Yoshi cry a lot. I quickly remembered last night's incident and told Yoshi. Yoshi stated that he had a dream about his father last night in which he was smoking next to his bed. When he finished, the other boy couldn't help but be surprised. There truly had been a conversation between Yoshi and his father, and I was an eyewitness to it. That guy suddenly shouted, "Look! There are actually some cigarette butts at the foot of Yoshi's bed!" We had to know that none of the 3 people in our dorm could smoke, and a strange feeling came over us. I couldn't help but recall the person I saw last night in Yoshi's dream, in which Yoshi's father sat in this position and smoked. Yoshi's tears flowed again as he sat on the bed, reaching out his hand to touch where his father had sat, as if the warmth that his father had left behind remained. "Don't worry, Dad. When I grow up, I'll take care of myself and Mother. I'll be a strong man." This was a sacred event that I witnessed firsthand, and to be honest, I was not afraid. In my heart, I only had a warm feeling about Yoshi's father-son relationship. We all graduated. Yoshi was introduced to work by the school, and the salary was also good. I believed his father was also relieved. It was a strange story that ran into a few years ago. That time I had to take an urgent leave of absence to visit my mother. My parents lived in the countryside. Only I went to the city to work. It took me more than a few hours to drive home from work. My parents were old, so I was worried about their health. After my mother's health improved, I decided to drive back to the city for the night. My parents were worried and wanted me to wait until early the morning to go. But I couldn't wait. I just went back to my hometown to check on my mother's health. I couldn't stay long because I had work to do. I explained that I had taken a quick leave and put aside all unfinished work. I need to go to a meeting early tomorrow morning, so I would be late if I stayed. My parents also understood that my work had many difficulties because working in a big city was not easy, especially for those with not excellent qualifications like me. So they just told me to be careful on the road and said goodbye to me. I drove for a bit more and then came out of the village road. The houses on the street were also sparse. Only trees and dirt roads remained. There were no streetlights. If I didn't drive carefully, I would get into a traffic accident. I didn't remember exactly, but I must have driven more than 10 kilometers and finally got off the dirt road. Ahead was the highway. Follow this highway, keep going straight, and I would reach the city. No need to turn anywhere else. While running, I was a little sleepy when suddenly I panicked because I saw a woman lying in front of me on the side of the road. She seemed to be seriously injured. When the headlights of the car came on, I could see even more clearly. Her clothes were torn. There were bright red bloodstains around her body. It looked like she was a victim of a collision or some pillage. I was wondering if I should stop or not. I pushed the wheel to pull over, but then changed my mind because this part often happened in many looting scenes. I need to be very vigilant. The road from my house to the highway was very rough. Because it was a village road, there were almost no houses around with lights on. While driving, I thought about the girl just now, wondering if she had an accident or not. But I still had work and took care of my elderly parents. I couldn't risk my life. I also apologized to the girl. If she was injured, I wouldn't have been able to help her. But then I thought I should put that aside to focus on driving. Suddenly, I saw something equally strange. So many confusing things happened to me tonight. On the side of the road, a woman was standing and waving to a car to hitchhike. It was strange. Why were there so many women walking alone on this deserted street? I thought about it and ran up to check it out. When the woman saw me, she took another step forward and waved her hand faster to get my attention. I also looked at her as very pretty and gentle, not like the robber type. However, I was still confused. I couldn't let my guard down. I did not stop the car completely, but slowly walked close to the side of the road and looked around carefully. The two sides of the road were completely empty. There were no trees to cover, so it was easy to see that there were no other people besides her, so there certainly wouldn't be bandits hiding to rob me. Seeing that, I felt reassured that I stopped the car completely, then called the girl to get in the car. She very happily ran over and thanked me non-stop, making me a little shy. Then she got into the car. I politely greeted her. I also did not forget to ask why she was standing in the middle of the road at late last night, because there were very few houses. She looked at me with a gentle expression and said that she had hitchhiked an acquaintance who came here to catch the bus back to the city to go to school, but was late for the last bus. She had been standing here since afternoon, but no one was willing to help, so she was lucky to meet me. After talking for a while, we were also silent. I also focused on driving. We needed to return to the city early in the morning, so we had to take advantage. At this point, I thought I had run for about an hour, but strangely the surroundings were still familiar to the eyes. I looked out the window to confirm my thoughts. It was still the highway, and the side of the road was a dry field without any trees, exactly like the road where I saw the girl had an accident just now. I clearly remembered that from the place where I met this woman, it only took about an hour to get off the highway and into the residential area. But today was strange. While I was thinking and looking out the window, I had to startle in horror when I turned to the side. Right in front of my eyes was the girl who had the accident earlier. She was still lying on the ground, so it turned out that I was running in a big circle and went back to her place. Too scared, I stepped on the gas and accelerated. I thought I had met a ghost, and that girl was a ghost. At this time, the woman sitting next to me asked me why I didn't help the person in the accident but ran away like that. I didn't say anything, just ran as fast as I could. The woman in my car saw too, so that girl was not a ghost. But no matter how much I tried to run, the scenery around me didn't change. Even though it was very dark, I could still clearly know that I was running in a big circle. At this point, I was so scared. Although I had driven for more than half an hour, the girl who had an accident still appeared in front of my eyes once again. I felt like I was lost in a big maze. Suddenly, a voice came from beside me, but it sounded like it was coming from underground. The voice belonged to the girl sitting next to me. She was blaming me for leaving the victim like that. That voice made me jump. I glanced over and saw the woman's pale face, sharp eyes, and angry expression. That thing scared me. I couldn't look at her anymore. I knew that she was not human anymore, but I still tried to explain that I still had a job and a family. There were countless robberies on the stretch of road, so I had to choose to ignore it. After that, a sudden silence also worried me. I sneaked a glance in the woman's direction to see if it was human or ghost after all. However, before I had time to see her figure clearly, the girl grabbed the steering wheel and held into my ear to force me to turn around. The sudden attack made me lose control of the wheel. The car lost control and I hit the wheel, then ran straight into the side of the road. I also didn't know where the car hit. My head also hit the steering wheel painfully, so when the car stopped, I could only rub my head without having time to look around. After waking up, I looked over to the passenger seat, but the girl from earlier was gone. I was sure I had met a ghost. I got out of the car to check my surroundings, to see how far I had run. This road was too dark. I couldn't see anything around clearly. I could only follow the light from the car to go. But I hadn't taken 10 steps before I had to stop. Cold sweat poured out like water because of what I saw before my eyes. A little more than 3 meters from my car was a deep precipice, dark below with no bottom visible. If the car did not stop in time, it could have plunged straight into the bottom of the cliff. That thought made my limbs so weak that I couldn't even stand. I fell to the ground and my body kept shaking from fear. I sat there for a long time to regain my sanity. Then I got into the car again and kept going. I thought the other woman scared me because she wanted to save the girl in distress. Just like that, I continued to run. The road gradually became familiar. I knew what I was about to see. As I expected, the girl was injured in the accident once again appeared on the side of the road in front of my eyes, the same as before. She was still lying like that. This time, I decided to stop the car and check her out. I would have guessed that the woman in the car and the girl in the accident were the same people. She was dead, so she appeared to make me help her body. At this point, I didn't think much of it. I turned the girl over and called her to see if there was any reaction or not. But surprisingly, when I saw her face, it wasn't the woman in my car. They were 2 different people. After checking, she was still breathing but very weak, so I rushed her to the hospital. The road went very smoothly, no more strange happenings. Feeling guilty the next day, I bought some fruit to visit her. The girl said she had a traffic accident and was robbed. If it weren't for me, she wouldn't have survived. But I was very guilty because I had no intention of helping her in the first place. As for that strange woman, I didn't know why she did that.
This strange tale is about a woman who worked as a farmer. Her young son contracted a mysterious illness while her husband was away working in a distant land, unable to help. She had no choice but to take her son to a pharmacy in the district town to seek treatment. After examining the boy for a while, the physician diagnosed him with a form of chickenpox. He wrote a prescription and said that one of the ingredients required silkworms that fed on mulberry leaves, which were not available in that area. She would have to find it on her own. The woman returned home and discussed with her mother-in-law where she could possibly find a silkworm. But at this time of year, all silkworms had already turned into cocoons. Where could she find one? A neighbor who overheard their conversation said that on the mountain there was an ancient mulberry tree, and on it lived an old silkworm that hadn't spun silk in years. Some people had reportedly seen the silkworm on that tree, but the location was treacherous. Seeing her son grow weaker by the day, the woman decided to venture into the mountain alone to find the silkworm. Her mother-in-law warned her that wild animals like wolves, leopards, or tigers occasionally appeared on the mountain and advised her to wait until her husband returned. But her fear for her son's life was too great. She worried that any delay could cost him his life. She ignored the advice and went into the mountain alone. Along the way, she indeed encountered many hardships and wild beasts, but driven by a mother's determination to save her child, she pressed on. After journeying through dense forests and steep mountains, she finally found the mulberry tree the neighbor had spoken of. The ancient tree was very tall, with a trunk as thick as a human's waist. There was no way to catch the silkworm except by climbing it. The mother struggled to climb the tree. The rough bark scraped and bruised her body, but she eventually made it to the top. True to the rumor, she spotted a large silkworm sleeping soundly on a mulberry leaf. Overjoyed, the farmer woman carefully wrapped the silkworm in a mulberry leaf and brought it home. As soon as she returned, she excitedly told her mother-in-law that she had found the silkworm and their son could be saved. The mother-in-law was equally delighted to hear that she had found a live silkworm. But when the woman opened the mulberry leaf, She was utterly shocked. The silkworm was gone. Her mother-in-law was also distraught. She guessed the woman must have dropped it on the way back and urged her to return and search for it. The woman hurriedly turned around and she retraced her steps back to the ancient mulberry tree, searching carefully, but the silkworm was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, she noticed a deep, dark hole at the base of the tree that she hadn't seen before. Thinking it might be a silkworm's den, the mother crouched down and cautiously peered into the hole, hoping the silkworm had returned there. However, inside the dark hollow was a strange creature. It looked like a silkworm, but had human-like arms, long, sharp teeth, and 4 glowing red eyes. The monstrous silkworm roared angrily at the woman, telling her to stop disturbing it and its child, or it would eat her. It turned out the silkworm she had taken was its offspring. Partly from fear and partly from exhaustion, the mother collapsed and fainted at the base of the tree. When she awoke, the hole was empty. The strange creature had vanished without a trace. The mother returned home but soon passed away. Without the live silkworm, the child could not be saved either. When the husband returned and learned that both his wife and son had died, he was devastated. He sat for a long time at their graves. Wanting to avenge his wife, he angrily grabbed a bundle of torches and went to the ancient tree where the hole was. Without hesitation, he set the tree on fire. The flames quickly engulfed the mulberry tree and reduced it to ashes. After the fire burned out, among the ashes lay the charred corpse of a giant silkworm, the monstrous creature that had caused his family's tragedy.
In my neighborhood had just appeared a massive hotel. It looked very luxurious. When the hotel was built, it was inevitable that people would talk about it. The hotel used to be an old apartment building. It was the most famous building in my neighborhood for being haunted. When the apartment building was still in operation, people living here all heard the cry of a woman lying on the top floor of the building. The crying was very loud, making many people in the building uncomfortable because they could not sleep. The crying kept echoing no matter how much the neighbors reminded the building management. This situation did not decrease. The problem continued until the people living in the building could not bear it anymore and chose to solve it themselves. Until one day, the people in the building couldn't stand the crying. They decided to come together to remind the owner to check and see what was happening. The men who lived in the building at the time followed the cry together, going upstairs to check it out. Later, they located the room where the crying was coming from, but the door had long been locked from the outside. Outside of the door was also a closed thick layer of dust. So, a neighbor in the next room opened the door to let the men go into the mysterious room through the connecting corridor between the two rooms. Once outside, the men also felt a little strange that the glass door looked very dusty, as if no one had been there in a long time. A brave person took the initiative to go to the front, look into the window to try to break the door to enter the house. But unexpectedly inside the room were no people except for a girl's soul which appeared. Hearing the noise, the girl immediately turned her face to the window, revealing a white, horrible face with white eyes that were bleeding red blood instead of tears. The girl's ghost found out about the strangers, suddenly became aggressive and wanted to fly out to chase away the men who were looking at her. The man just witnessed the horror scene, feeling extremely panicked and unable to bear it. He ran as fast as he could to his room. From that day on, that cry grew louder and louder. It echoed throughout the corridors of each room. Many people also saw the girl's ghost in the abandoned room. It was wearing a red dress.
That ghost was crying and hovering in the corridor all along. The residents in the building could not stand this. One after another moved their houses to another place. Rumors of the ghost in the building were getting louder and louder. No one dared to come to this building anymore. After all of the residents had moved out, only the elderly couple remained in the building. The couple reluctantly stayed in the building because they had nowhere else to live. But every night the elderly couple received strange phone calls from whom they didn't know. At first they thought that someone was trying to break up the couple, but this lasted so long that the couple panicked. Every time the wife picked up the phone, there was no one on the other end of the line, but only a cry, like the cry of the dead girl's soul. After that, the power lines in the building were also frequently broken. Every time that strange phone call came in, the electricity in the building would be completely turned off. The TV in the room was also interfered with, making the elderly couple gradually feel afraid and couldn't stand it anymore. Finally, the older couple also moved to another place. The building was inactive and has been abandoned ever since. Since the day the building was abandoned, no one dared to come near the building but the homeless who needed a place to stay. But so far, no one dared to stay there for a full night, because people would hear the screams of homeless people sleeping in the middle of the night. The whole building was immersed in the dark, scary, silent, attracting the attention of curious people. Many people in the neighborhood every night went passing by the building, and they saw the spirit of a girl standing outside the window with white eyes. Young people, because they were so curious about the ghostly rumors surrounding the building, they did not hesitate to come and explore. They went in as a group, exploring every nook and cranny of the house with its ruins. The air inside the building was colder than many people thought. Leaves and trash were scattered all over the corridor. They entered the room that was said to be haunted, and around there was nothing else besides the old items. A moment later, the young people immediately shouted in panic when they discovered something extremely horrifying. In front of them, there was a red cloth. It was similar to the rumor about the girl in the red dress that was often mentioned. "There's nothing here, so it's just a rumor," said one young man. After checking, they did not find anything strange, so the group thought that the rumors about the girl's ghost was not true. From that moment on, the whole room had strange cold winds, causing the people in the room to feel a little scared. But because they did not believe the rumors, the group decided to continue to the other rooms to check. They entered a room at the end of the corridor. The size of the room here was also somewhat smaller than the other rooms. The interior did not have much furniture like the other rooms, and there was only one chair in the middle of the room. The young people also discovered many broken trees and a lot of small rocks lying around the chair on the floor. Everyone in the group started to get scared and discuss what had happened here. The only thing that interested them the most was the stool in the middle of the room. Many people began to question the origin of the other girl's soul. But no matter how much that were discussed, all the reasons given were too reasonable and irrational, making things even more stressful. A moment later, from within the wall appeared a girl with a red dress rushing towards a group of young people. The group started to panic, scream, and started to run, but the girl in the red dress kept chasing them down. The group quickly ran out of the building and made the ghostly rumors about this building become even more noticeable. The press and media also began to cover the building with questions raised about the mysteries there. The building then became more famous and noticed by many people. There were many people who did not hesitate to stay there overnight to verify the rumors. But not long after that, the whole building was sealed and a high-class hotel was built there. Strangely, after that, the hotel did well and did not appear to have any strange events.
This story happened to a young man named Jusu. After graduating 12th grade, he passed the entrance exam to a university in the city. Living in an unfamiliar place was extremely difficult, but it only took Jusu a few days to settle in. He even made friends with 2 boys in his dorm and was about to have his first college trip. The trip's location was not far away. In fact, it was just a hill next to the school. As planned, they would camp overnight on the hill. The air on the hill was really fresh. Although the hike up the hill was a bit rough, no one felt tired. However, things were not going smoothly. After walking for a while, they started to get lost. Eventually, they found a small path covered with trees. It looked very murky and mysterious. At the end of the small path lay a cold and lonely grave in the woods. Jusu was basically a child without fear. Seeing that, he invited 2 of his friends to come for a closer look. At first glance, it definitely looked like a tomb, but the shape of the tomb was really strange. The other 2 boys only stood there for a few minutes, then left. But Jusu still lingered, standing there, staring at the tomb. But strangely enough, the more he looked, the more he felt some kind of magical energy. This energy completely engrossed him. Then, his friend came over, shook his shoulder and called his name, loudly. Jusu suddenly woke up, but Jusu's face was still pale, and his limbs soft. He was sweating like a waterfall. Not only Jusu's face, but also his friends' faces had deteriorated, as if they had just seen something terrifying. The picnic must stop. But from that day on, strange things kept happening to dorm room 310. The first thing that happened was with Jusu's slippers. He has a habit of neatly arranging his slippers under the bed when he sleeps. But since that night, he was waking up to his slippers dispersed all around his room. Days later, the slippers were still being rearranged all over his dorm. So Jusu decided to talk to his roommates. But their expressions were very strange. One afternoon, Jusu suddenly saw all his roommates packing up, as if they wanted to leave. He thought they must be angry about the trivial matter a few days before, and that they decided to move. But looking at their facial expressions, Jusu could tell it was for other reasons. Then, someone new moved in, and his old roommates left overnight. But Jusu stayed because he really didn't believe in ghost stories. Until one night. On a normal evening, while reading a book, Jusu fell asleep and was woken up by the dorm's bell. But he just closed his eyes, ignoring it. 5 hours passed, and it was dinner time. At dinner, the dorm manager didn't see him come down. She was afraid that something was wrong. She ran upstairs to call him. Not believing his eyes, he looked at his watch again. But it was still 5 o'clock. His watch had stopped working. Even though he panicked a little, Jusu tried to reassure himself that he had just fallen asleep while reading the book. After dinner, Jusu decided to finish reading the book before going to bed. But with only a few lines, he could barely hold his eyes open. His body really couldn't resist sleep. Then he put the book aside, turned off the light, and went to bed. Suddenly, he woke up at 4 a.m. in a panic, as if he had just had a nightmare. Not only that, he had also found himself wearing proper clothes. But from what he remembers, he wore an old t-shirt to bed yesterday. His feet even wore shoes, and the shoes were covered with dirt and mud, as if he had been walking around for a long time. The shoes made his bed muddy. But Jusu really couldn't remember where he went yesterday. He just remembered turning off the lights and going to bed. On the sole of his muddy shoes, there was still fresh grass, so he could tell that he definitely went outside. In order to clarify what happened to him, Jusu decided to find his best friend Ken, who lived in the same dorm before. After school, Jusu secretly followed Ken to the garage. Looking around, seeing no one, Jusu immediately approached his best friend. Then, he suddenly grabbed his neck and pulled him into a hidden corner in the garage. As soon as he saw Jusu, Ken panicked, as if seeing a ghost. Blood drained from his face. After being released by Jusu and knowing the reason for his actions, Ken was able to calm down, but his hands and feet were still shaking. Of course, Ken firmly refused to answer Jusu's questions, only asking him to let go. Seeing that, Jusu began to soften his voice, saying that he really wanted to know what happened after they returned from their picnic. Seeing Jusu's facial expression, Ken started to feel pity. He lowered his face and thought for a long time. Observing Ken's body language, Jusu could tell that something bad had happened to him. Ever since coming to the city, he considered Ken his best friend. But now, when he was in trouble, the only thing Ken was doing was avoiding him. Immediately his anger erupted. Jusu could no longer keep calm. He grabbed Ken by the collar. Facing Jusu's anger, Ken gave in and finally accepted to speak the truth. It turned out that the strange things started happening after Jusu stood in front of the grave on the school trip. Ken told Jusu that he looked like he was possessed by a ghost. His eyes rolled back and his whole face was pale and mouth grinning wide. He told him that he also started waving his hands and feet and was singing like a crazy man. Ken went on to say that after that day, when the clock hit 12 o'clock, he got out of bed and would sleepwalk around the dorm. Ken said that every night was like that, and that Jusu kept pacing back and forth in the bathroom. He said that he kept banging his head against the wall and his mouth muttering something terrifying. Seeing Jusu's unusual behavior, Ken said that all the friends in the dorm were sure he was haunted, and then everyone chose to leave for peace. Hearing this, Jusu couldn't control his emotions, giving Ken a strong fist to the face. After that, he left Ken sitting on the ground. Jusu then called his father to tell him everything and got scolded by him. It seemed he knew how scary the tomb was. His face blacked out, and with a cold voice, he began to talk about the unknown tomb. 2 days later, after receiving the call, the father immediately set off and went to the dormitory where his son was staying. As soon as he arrived, Jusu's father asked to take him to the unknown tomb. Jusu also didn't say anything more. He immediately led his father to the hill next to the school. Jusu's father looked at the anonymous tomb for a long time. His face looked very serious. Then, he sat on the ground and opened the wooden chest he had brought along. It turned out that inside was copper brass. Then, he used this copper brass to burn pieces of votive paper. Soon after, Jusu's father stood up. His mouth began to murmur, as if he was reciting a spell. Strangely, as soon as his words ended, the copper brass trembled in a frightening way. Then, the fire in the brass was burning louder and louder, like someone added oil to it. At that same time, the father's face became more serious. It seemed that their request made the soul angry. In that moment, Jusu was clearly terrified, thinking that he could be haunted for the rest of his life. The father was also a bit panicked, but still tried to stay calm to reassure him. He put his hand on Jusu's shoulder saying that he would try to ask again. This time, Jusu's father prayed more sincerely. He bent down, clasped his hands respectfully. When the father finished his plead, the fire in the brass immediately shrank. It seemed that the spirit had accepted his appeal. No hurry to leave, after finishing everything, Jusu and his father still lingered to burn the remaining holy paper. Then, they tidied up the ashes, cleaned the tomb, and left. Perhaps Jusu would never forget the horror that happened to him on this strange grave. Afterwards, he also realized how much his father worried about him. Although his face was always calm, his shirt was already drenched in sweat on his back. He also realized that his father's profession was not as bad as he always thought it to be. Although he did not show it much, he really loved his son, so much. A few days later, Jusu's life began to settle down again. Perhaps this is why our grandparents often told us not to stare at the grave of the deceased.